You found the skeleton. How would you tell if it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I'm back from that quick trip through the World Stone. When last you left off, Jennifer Hall Rivera was failing abysmally to show how geology somehow supported a global flood. You know, despite being the thing that finally disabused science of the notion. Now she has another way for us to know.
Now let's take a look at forensic science. Forensic comes from that word forensis, which means before the forum. So we're gathering knowledge to present before the forum. This is my area of specialty.
Hey, it's one of those pesky historical sciences, which means that we really can't know anything in there unless we approach it with a pre-drawn conclusion according to this particular pseudoscientist. So as we go through this, let's keep that in mind.
And so first I want to look at eyewitness testimony, because remember, forensic science, as I talked about earlier, is a historical science.
While eyewitness testimony can indeed be important, it is generally considered among the least reliable forms of evidence because it can be biased and human memory is notoriously unreliable. People can honestly remember an event in a way that differs significantly from how it actually happened, and can even remember things that never happened at all.
I go to a crime scene, I did not see that crime occur. So what are detectives going to do?
They're going to use the basic assumption of science that the universe doesn't vary in its behavior in the past. You know, the thing Jen spent most of the first video in the series complaining about.
Try to talk to someone who did, right? We want that eyewitness testimony.
Oh, and here I thought we were focusing on forensics, which is what you tend to do without an eyewitness. Especially since they get things wrong so often, whereas the data do not. But then, I guess the whole idea is a bit of a problem for young Earth creationists.
But the problem with eyewitness testimony, especially in humans, is that I can interview 10 people who observed the exact same crime, and you're going to get a completely different description about what that suspect was wearing or what color car they were in, because we are flawed, we're humans, we're imperfect, and our mind is not a camera. It can't take a photograph and remember that level of detail. We're influenced by the situation and the stress we're under. All these factors come into play when we observe an event.
Is she doing my job for me? I feel like she's doing my job for me. But yes, she is right about this.
So human eyewitness testimony is not accurate.
I wouldn't say that. It can be accurate, but it can also be inaccurate. That makes it unreliable, which isn't the same thing. If you have an unreliable friend, it means your friends sometimes come through and sometimes does not. Not that they don't come through in general.
And in fact, forensic science is hampered by our inability to reproduce the past. I love how this forensic pathologist described it. He said the most valuable asset we have in forensics is the testimony of a truthful witness.
Unfortunately, the only way to tell if they're being truthful is by looking at the data. Can what they said correspond to the physical state of the crime scene in question? Ideally, there are cameras which can clear up any mismatch, but in the absence of that, if someone says that they saw someone stabbed by a 7-foot-tall man, but the injuries on the 5-foot-tall victim are all blunt force injuries on the torso that seem to have come from a flat angle, then that witness simply isn't right, even if they're not lying. Because we know eyewitness testimony isn't reliable, and that reality is, we have to base our assessment of eyewitness statements on the physical data, not the other way around. Now, if the testimony doesn't contradict the data, then it can suggest solutions to otherwise insoluble questions, or suggest new avenues to examine for further data.
So you hope to talk to someone who can give you pretty much as accurate facts as possible when you're looking at an event that's unobservable.
But how do you vet the alleged eyewitness? Oh, right, you have to compare it to the physical data. So, for example, if your eyewitness seems to imply a bunch of biogenic limestone was laid down in a flood, but you happen to know that that's physically impossible, well, seems like the eyewitness is mistaken.
But some people may challenge us and say, well, how can we trust the Bible?
Good question, especially in cases where it is opposed to all the physical evidence we can find.
Right? How can we trust God's word? You're saying, man wrote down God's words, and if man's imperfect and we make mistakes, how can we trust what God's word says?
Nope. I don't really care about any of that. I care about the fact that if we interpret the book the way AIG does, then it is at odds with reality. It's no more at odds with reality than if it said that plants are red and the sky is yellow, and that stars are black dots in a white night sky.
But the Bible clearly tells us that it is the spoken word of God, that every word in the Bible is inspired.
It actually doesn't, but even if it did, we can't find the justification for taking the Bible the way AIG does, simply by looking at what the Bible says. That's why we call this circular reasoning. We can trust the Bible because it says we can, and we know that when it says that we can trust it, we can. Because we can trust the Bible because it says we can. And we know that when it says that, we can trust it, we can. See the problem there? No matter how many times your alleged eyewitness says, "Trust me, bro," we still have to test it against the actual evidence. After this, she just doubles down on the circular reasoning. Since that adds nothing to the discussion, I won't subject you to it.
Another example that we see in forensic science is what we call trace analysis or hair analysis. I can go to a crime scene, I can find a single piece of hair, and I can tell you right away whether it is from a human or whether it is from an animal. And what is so fascinating is when we look at it and know it's from an animal, we know exactly which animal kind it is from.
Well, first, no, you can't tell what kind it's from because there's no way to define kinds in the first place. But second, the fact that the hairs can be identified down to the species level isn't all that surprising. Further, I want to note that other than being in color or not, the image we're shown has primate fur and the human hair looking nearly identical. So I'm not sure this is the point Jen really wants to go with, but let's let her cook.
Because under the microscope, the cat kind looks different from the dog kind.
But does the carnivoran kind look different from the ungulate kind? Does the ferae kind look different from the Euarchontoglire kind? Does the Larazothere kind look different from the Afrothere kind? Does the marsupial kind look different from the placental kind? Does the monotreme kind look different from the therian kind? See the problem? That you can identify hairs down to the species level of necessity means that you can identify all the higher taxa to which that species belongs. But this in itself doesn't tell you anything about which groups constitute created kinds.
A single piece of fur. We can know whether it's from a horse kind, or the pet rabbit, or the pet ferret. So what we see is by created kinds, there's distinct different patterns. And these are just a few examples that you see here.
Is she suggesting that you can distinguish kinds by hair analysis? I mean, that's a new claim, and it's never actually been published even in the LARP journals of young Earth creationism. But I would be fascinated to see any more information on this and how this actually lines up with the idea of kinds, but violates common ancestry, since I'm not sure how it could. This would mean that, at least for mammals, anyone could do the analysis and they should always get essentially the exact same kinds. This would be an actual breakthrough in creation science, the first one ever, near as I can tell. Or she's just pretending that the fact that you can identify species from hair is somehow a brand new revelation, and is to be expected under either model. I wonder just how much difference it takes before you can say that a hair is from a different kind.
Directly confirming what God's word says about created kinds.
Are we not going to hear what the criteria are for distinguishing kinds by hair? We're just going to hear that we can? We haven't even gotten a citation for this.
And we're so valuable to God.
That according to AIG, he had to kill every last human but for 8, including all the infants with their evil infant ways?
That he knows the very number of our hairs at any time. I think that's just so amazing.
That just kind of comes free with omniscience, so it doesn't really matter if God cares about us or not. The only time such minutia about something could indicate concern is if it takes effort to learn that. You see, people know I care about dinosaurs because I have to spend time learning about them. I don't simply know about them through osmosis. God, on the other hand, just knows everything automatically according to AIG. So that he knows how many hairs any given person has isn't actually a sign of any particular concern. It's almost like in Luke where this comes from. The actual analogy is that God keeps the birds and flowers alive and thriving, and he is so wise and knowledgeable and has already had a special relationship with humans that how could humans not feel like they can rely on God to provide for them?
Now we also can see there's a distinct difference between what we see in not just in the hair samples of animals, but in humans as well, because we can get, especially if we get the hair follicle, we can get a DNA profile on that. We can actually distinguish an individual human from each other from a single piece of hair.
Does Dr. Jennifer Hall Rivera think that the follicles of other mammals besides humans don't have DNA? You can DNA profile any mammal this way. It's just that most places don't happen to have a databank of individual animal DNA profiles, but you can absolutely match an individual of any mammal species with DNA from their hair.
But the FBI recognizes that human hair and animal hairs are distinctly different as well. This is from their website where they say this characteristic serves to distinguish human hairs from animal hairs.
Funny thing, FBI 2019 isn't an actual reference. You know what happened when I searched this exact phrase both with and without FBI? It didn't show up. There was an article called Forensic Hair Comparison Background Information for Interpretation published by the FBI with some of the same keywords, but overall, yes, human hair is unique. All species have unique hair. However, while humans may have a unique scale pattern, which as their own species isn't horribly surprising, their hair medulla under scanning electron microscope falls in line with the great apes, and particularly close to chimpanzees. And of course, humans also do strange things to their hair, like washing it with soap, bleaching it, cutting it, etc. So there are also mechanical and chemical changes that humans do to their hair behaviorally that distinguishes it in a lab, but that are not a biological difference.
And they're referring to the imbricate pattern or the cuticle pattern that is on human hairs and animal hairs.
Almost. Humans and all mammals have scales on their hair, but only humans are known to have an imbricate pattern of the hairs. Other animals have other unique patterns, often being identifiable down to the species on this basis. So this puts humans on the same footing as all other mammals.
Now we're also going to take a look at fingerprints today.
Oh good, something humans share with other apes, but of course, each ape species has unique characteristics to their own digital dermal ridges.
Because we do see a distinct difference, because primates do have fingerprints.
It's not just that primates also have fingerprints, it's that only primates have fingerprints. Squirrels don't have fingerprints, dogs don't have fingerprints, cows don't have fingerprints. All species are unique within their wider group. The dhole of South and Central Asia has a different number of nipples compared to other canids. That doesn't make it not a canid, and even less not an animal. Among procyonids, only kinkajous have prehensile tails. Among apes, only orangutans have phalanges. Among toothed whales, only sperm whales can dive deep enough to feed on giant squid regularly. Among bats, only vampire bats can subsist on a diet of just blood. You know what none of that means? That these animals aren't animals, and even less that they aren't procyonids, hominids, or odontocetes. That's simply not how taxonomy works, and in cases other than humans, Jennifer knows this.
But what we find is there are animals that God gave unique fingerprint patterns to. It's not just restricted to humans.
But it is restricted to primates, along with having nails instead of claws, fully enclosed orbits, those weirdly flexible shoulder joints, etc. Why is it that every time we find a trait unique to primates, humans have it too? Could it be because humans are just primates? Like has been recognized since the time of Carolus Linnaeus. In fact, in places where other primates live, the kinship between humans and the other primates has been recognized for far longer. Just the name orangutan means old man of the forest, because they were recognized by the humans who lived near them as being in some way or another kind of the same thing that humans are. Numerous societies have origin myths that give primates a shared or similar origin to humans. Monkey gods tend to be associated with art and wisdom, things that are pretty characteristically human according to many humans. Again, showing the ease with which humans recognize their kinship with other primates.
And so when we take a look at primate fingerprints, evolutionists like to say, oh, well, this is just evidence that we've descended from a common ancestor, right? They have friction skin, we have friction skin, and they have fingerprints, and we have unique fingerprints.
That's true.
But what we find is when we study primate fingerprints versus human fingerprints is that they are distinctly different. And there's lots of research out there about this. They're clearly different from humans.
The citation used for this is listed simply as Henneberg et al. 2015. Now that's the kind of citation that's fine for an inline citation with a works cited section somewhere else in your publication. But in this format, where there is no works cited page, either in the video or in the original video description, that is completely inadequate. Searching for papers by someone named Henneberg with both fingerprints and fingertips from 2015 yielded cyanobacterial diversity in biological soil crusts along a precipitation gradient northwest Negev Desert, Israel. That's it. I'm pretty sure that's not what she's referencing. Searching without the keywords also popped up, Are Human Faces Unique? A metric approach to finding single individuals without duplicates in large samples. Understanding configurations of relational attractiveness of the customer firm using fuzzy set QCA. An empirical investigation of network-oriented behaviors in business-to-business markets. Biological plausibility as a tool to associate analytical data of micropollutants and effects potentials in wastewater, surface water, and sediments with the effect in fishes. If you compress the spring, will it snap hard? The Ukrainian crisis and the balance of threat theory. The difficulty of sexing skeletons from unknown populations. The life history of Ardipithecus ramidus, a heterochronic model of sexual and social maturation. Intercognitive representations in business networks. When stress frustrates and when it does not. Configural models of frustrated versus mellow salespeople. And it goes on like this for more than 2,000 entries. Now clearly some of these are closer to what we're looking for, and those works are the works by a certain M. Henneberg. But his only paper in 2015 is The Immune System and Responses to Cancer Coordinated Evolution. This is clearly not what we're looking for. In fact, nothing he has written that I can find is about fingerprints. Searching the exact quotation, on the fingertips the ridges form distinct tented arch patterns, which are clearly different from human ones, turns up no results on Google Scholar from the year 2000 all the way to 2023. The conclusion I am forced to come to is that this citation simply doesn't exist, and this is the second one in a row. Now, I'm not saying Dr. Jennifer Hall Rivera is a fucking liar, but I am saying that it appears she is a person who says intentionally false statements. And of course, even if this is an accurate citation from a real paper, which it doesn't seem to be, once again, we're just at the argument that humans are unique among primates and therefore are not primates, which makes no sense.
And primates also have what's called a higher ridge density than humans, and what that means is...
You gotta love 80-year-old citations, but okay, let's see if this is a traceable source, even though it's laughably badly cited. Well, in 1942, the wrong year, Harold Cummins wrote a review of dermatoglyphic work in the Journal of Mammalogy, so it seems that this is the Cummins we're looking for. Neither Google Scholar, SciSpace, nor Wikipedia list any publications for Cummins in the year 1943, although they do for 1942 and 1944. Searching for the quote in quotations to find any site with the exact words yields nothing on Google Scholar and nothing on regular Google, which as a result simply shows results for the search without quotations. Interestingly, the first thing that pops up there is from Answers in Genesis. It's an article by Jennifer Hall Rivera, published January 1st, 2019, called Close But Not Close Enough, Fingerprints. And it's apparently a reprint of an Answers magazine article. Of course, the article has no citations, but does say scientists have observed that the ridges in human fingerprints have a higher density than in primate fingerprints, since primates have finer ridges that have many more per centimeter, 22 average, than humans, 11 average. Now, first, I would wonder how much of this has to do with the fact that among primates, humans are among the biggest, as are all hominids. My guess is that if you scaled a pygmy marmoset fingerprint up, you'd get a lot fewer ridges per centimeter. But also, what scientists have observed this? Where do they publish it? I don't know, so I guess back to the drawing board. I'm still not saying Dr. Jennifer Hall Rivera is a liar, but it's harder and harder to not conclude that she is a person who says intentionally false things. At least in this case, we can be pretty well assured that the person she's pretending to cite actually did work on hand and footprints, including finger and toe prints. The last place I checked was for Hall Rivera's publications in the Answers Research Journal or the Creation Research Society Quarterly. Because maybe if she published there on fingerprinting, she would have a proper citation. But of course, she has no publications in either. So for the third time in a row, we get an argument that would fail if it's true, but that also relies on a source that by all appearances traces itself not back to a real publication, but rather to the results of Hall Rivera's most recent enema.
Is that those individual ridges on a primate are thinner, so they just have more of them.
If only English had a phrase for this sort of thing. Oh yeah, it does! That's a difference of degree, not of kind. Thanks, English.
Primates have about 22 ridges per centimeter, while humans have about 11 ridges per centimeter, just because our ridges are thicker.
Oh hey, that claim that comes from her own non-peer-reviewed magazine article. Sure would be nice to get a real citation.
But it's one of those distinct differences that we do see.
According to basically this one person here, but I repeat again, pointing out how humans are unique among primates doesn't make them not primates. Tyrannosaurus rex was bigger than any other tyrannosauroid, which by this logic makes it not a tyrannosauroid. But this works for any animal. Basically, if we took this argument seriously, not only would it separate humans from apes, it would separate gorillas from apes. It would separate tigers from felines. It would turn every single species back into a separate creation, the original position of creationists.
Should we expect to see differences?
Yes, both evolution and creationism predict that humans will not be the same as other species. I mean, if they were, then wouldn't that make them just the same species as the other one they're identical to? Pointing out that a certain taxon is unique among larger taxa to which it belongs doesn't indicate anything that is a problem for evolution, since the whole reason you split larger taxa, like Hominid, into smaller taxa, like genera such as gorilla, pan, or homo, is because those lower taxa are themselves unique. This is simply how taxonomy and evolution work. As new branches grow on the tree of life, they get less and less similar to other branches to which they are connected as time goes on. That's also why members of various taxa look more similar as we look back in time. Today, equids and tapiromorphs are easily distinguished, the former being horses, zebras, and donkeys, and the latter being rhinos and tapirs. But if you look at our earliest fossil equids and tapiromorphs, it requires high degrees of expertise on tooth anatomy to distinguish them, because they're otherwise essentially identical. Similarly, our earliest Sirenian and our earliest Proboscideans are extremely similar. Well, similar enough that if you didn't know that one was the earliest manatee or dugong, and that the other was the earliest elephant, you'd probably say they should be in the same kind according to creationists. If horses and rhinos persist for another few million years, something that is pretty iffy, especially for the rhinos, then I'm sure that their descendants will look even less like each other than their modern ancestors. And yet, they'll still remain parasodactyls, odd-toed ungulates.
Well, the Bible tells us in Genesis 1:24 that God said he created all living things according to their kind, so we can be confident knowing that primates are only going to produce more primates.
As required by evolution. Also, are we now saying that primate is a kind? Are chimpanzees in the same kind as a slow loris or bush baby? I mean, if that's the case, it's going to be really hard to keep humans out of that kind, because all the apes are far more similar to humans than they are to, say, ring-tailed lemurs.
And that humans, Genesis 1:26 says, are made in the image of God.
So, why is God monkey? But seriously, if you're a person who believes in the Imago Dei, you're allowed to just say that it is something imbued in some monkeys a few 100,000 years ago, and that rather than being a physical similarity, since, most Christians tend to think that God has no body in his essence, it's about moral standing, creative ability, rationality, etc. I'm not really here for theology. I'm just saying you can make your theology far less dumb than AIG's and keep things like belief in God, the Imago Dei, the Incarnation, etc., all without denying science.
Right? We are distinct and set apart and given a dominion over God's creation.
I wonder if that dominion grant should make Christians concerned for things like the environment and the well-being of other living things which the Bible places under them as wards and subjects. It's almost like maybe AIG should stop being climate skeptics and instead actively work to spread awareness about the problems faced by the non-human parts of the living world. But nah, that's not right-wing enough. They know that their fans love oil and don't think carbon dioxide could ever be a problem. And heck, if Jesus is coming back anyway, why worry about the livability of the planet for other organisms? Never mind humans.
Another difference we see in forensic science is in gait. Now, these is that Laetoli footprints I was talking about earlier that you should definitely go check out when you're in the Lucy exhibit today. But when you take a look at those Laetoli footprints, for a long time they were trying to say this was this primate.
Yep, it's a primate no matter how human it is, because humans are primates, just like they're mammals or vertebrates. Something that, curiously, I've never heard Answers in Genesis deny.
Early ancestor of humans, that image I showed you earlier. But what's interesting now is we can look at this and we can clearly see these are human.
That's weird, because they're actually intermediate between the footprints left by habitually unshod humans and chimpanzees walking bipedally. And in 2021, McNutt et al. Found that they were distinctly not human in footprint evidence of early hominid locomotor diversity at Laetoli, Tanzania, as did Meldrum et al. In 2011 in their paper Ichnotaxonomy of Laetoli Trackways, the earliest hominid footprints. Same for Tuttle et al. In their 1991 publication, Laetoli toes in Australopithecus afarensis.
Right, they have a heel-toe strike. That's how humans walk. We can also see that the feet are slightly pointed out. You've never noticed, you should take a look when you're walking, your feet slightly point out, just like this. That is because of our skeletal structure.
Yes, the footprints do have many similarities to human footprints, almost like Australopithecus afarensis is related to modern humans and shares many biomechanical adaptations with modern humans to facilitate bipedal upright locomotion. But also, Hatala et al. In the 2016 paper Laetoli Footprints reveal bipedal gait biomechanics different from those of modern humans and chimpanzees, we find that they're actually unique. A conclusion shared by White and Sua in the 1987 paper Hominid Fossils at Laetoli, Facts and Interpretations. And of course, Raiklen et al. In the 2010 paper Laetoli Footprints preserve earliest direct evidence of human-like bipedal biomechanics. Unlike in the AIG video, my sources are in the description, and even if they weren't, by giving year, author, and title, you could just find them in a quick Google Scholar search. Nice how, unlike some people in this video, I'm not hiding my sources, isn't it?
Primates don't walk like that.
Well, Australopithecus afarensis manifestly did, and Hall Rivera thinks they're primates, so yes they do. Just not most of them. In fact, all primates have a known tendency towards at least occasional bipedal locomotion. It's the default for grounded hylobatids, and in many lemurs it has changed to a bunny hopping motion on the ground, but it remains bipedal. Even other apes are known to walk bipedally while carrying things in their arms, or sometimes just to get a view from a higher vantage point than their knuckle walking stances would normally permit.
Primates walk with their feet straight because they have a different pelvic structure.
Oh hey look, it's the pelvic structure of Australopithecus afarensis that has that nice intermediate pelvic structure that allows for bipedal locomotion. There's nothing like lying about extinct primates to help you overturn basic level observations about fossils.
Well, when we take a look at this, it's the Smithsonian Institute, I found this on their website, they're actually starting to admit that, these early impressions that we see here look a lot like human feet.
Well, yeah, they do look human. That's why they're significant. That's literally the whole point. But I already cited a bunch of articles pointing out that they're definitely not human. But hey, let's check our source, which this time actually has a full title, year, and even URL. The URL is wrong, but not by much. And what do you know? The first sentence is, quote, "The Laetoli footprints were most likely made by Australopithecus afarensis, the early human whose fossils were found in the same sediment layer," end quote. So when the article says human, It included Australopithecus in that category, something that Jen here would not be okay with, and at no point does it even hint that these footprints are identical to those left by Homo sapiens. I guess now we know why she so rarely bothers to properly cite things, because apparently creationism tends to follow the first law of Flurfs. Flurf citations always contradict the Flurf claim. Yet more evidence to throw on the pile that creationists are no better than flat earthers.
For a long time, they didn't want to admit they were human because in a secular timeline, it didn't fit their evolutionary ideas.
No, it's because they're not made by Homo sapiens, something all the peer-reviewed literature confirms. But Jen here did manage to find an article that calls Australopithecus a human, and then says that the footprints are human, in that they were made by Australopithecus. Which means, yeah, I am now comfortable in saying that Jen is a liar, because her own citation is only about 5 paragraphs long, and there's no way she didn't notice this if she read it. This is a classic example of a quote mine in creationism.
But we look at these footprints and go, yes, they're clearly human, and they could not be older than about 4,500 years, which would have been the time of the global flood.
Ah yes, when you decide you already know the conclusion, and then you just close your eyes, stick your fingers in your ear, and start screaming the words to Hillsong worship music. You can easily ignore all the evidence that you're very wrong from actual experts, and instead rest easy in your own ignorance and dishonesty. But at least you don't have to think deeply about things like science.
They said they have highly divergent toes that help them climb in grass. They're referring to primates.
Oh good, more from the article that clearly says that Australopithecus is being called a human for the purposes of this article, meaning that it flatly contradicts the point Jen is making, that these footprints are made by modern humans in contrast to Australopithecines. Fun times.
They say the footprints also show the gait of these early humans,
by which they explicitly mean Australopithecus afarensis.
Was heel strike the way modern humans walk.
Yes, Australopithecus walked with heel strikes first, which is how modern humans walk, which is evidence that humans share ancestry with non-human apes. All she's doing is showing evidence for evolution, but because she found a short article doing this while calling things she thinks are just apes human, she can lie to her audience as this is evidence against that very thing.
So they're trying to say, well, could still maybe have been a transitional, but it's a lot more human-like, right?
No, they're literally and clearly saying in a way I refuse to believe this PhD is too stupid to understand that the animal she is saying did not leave these human-like footprints, in fact did leave them, indicating that the predicted transition between basal apes and modern humans in fact exists, and that Australopithecus is an example of such a transition. In addition, I have already cited some half dozen of the hundreds of papers on these footprints that conclude that they were impossible to have been left by Homo sapiens, and instead, despite their similarities with the footprints of that species, were in fact consistent with the biomechanics of Australopithecus afarensis. I don't really think it's necessary, but in case you're wondering, numerous citations from paleoanthropologists and experts in biomechanics and ichnofossils trump a blurb on a few paragraphs on the Smithsonian website. But you know what? Let's toss in another study. Rakelin and Gordon's 2017 paper, Interpretation of Footprints from Site S Confirms Human-like Bipedal Biomechanics in Laetoli Hominins, confirms that the prints were in fact intermediate between chimpanzee and modern humans, although leaning closer to human, and that the footfalls indicated that they were incompatible with Homo sapiens foot morphology, but that they were compatible with known remains of foot bones from Australopithecus afarensis.
Clearly human when we look at these, and you can almost see smaller footprints walking next to the larger ones as you see here.
Yep, the interpretation is generally that the trail was left by a male and female walking with each other more or less in lockstep. The smaller set of prints are also deeper on one side, which has been seen as an indication that she may have been carrying an infant on her hip.
You know, Genesis 1:26 says, God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, right? Humans are distinct, set apart. We walk upright.
But so do the Australopithecines, according to the source she herself cited. I guess humans aren't all that set apart.
And our gait, that we call it, the way that we walk, is distinctly different. That's exactly what we'd expect to see.
Yes, that seems fair. What creationists should expect to see is humans having a unique gait that sharply separates them from things that she would consider to be apes, just like Australopithecus afarensis. Too bad all 7 of my peer-reviewed citations and her 1 non-peer-reviewed citation all say that's not what's happening.
So let's look a little bit at biochemistry today. Bio means life, chemistry means cast together. So we're kind of looking at molecular processes in living organisms.
Okay, I guess it's time to fit in another topic with just over 6 minutes left in the talk.
And the first one I just briefly want to touch on is DNA. Now, part of that DNA project we talked about, one of the conclusions that they found was that humans do share 99% of their DNA. 99% of the DNA in this room is exactly the same.
Yeah, you would expect the members of a species to have a lot of DNA in common, although humans are a bit less diverse than typical.
Why? Because we are one human race.
I think it's more the other way around, because humans have relatively low genetic diversity. There's no way to divide them into races with any objectivity. But hey, if the message is that races are fake and racism is stupid, I'm on board.
Directly confirming what God's word told us about the creation of humans.
I could point out that the modern concept of human races was actually invented largely by Christians who used Genesis to justify it as an excuse as to why it wasn't a horrible injustice for them to hold slaves primarily from Africa. That would be uncharitable, though.
Acts 17:26 goes, He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth.
You mean the book that was written as a polemic against the gods of Mesopotamia with superlative language about the God of Israel credits that very same God with the creation of humanity as part of its polemic? Wow! Who could have predicted this? It's still not empirical evidence.
That's exactly what we would expect to see. We are one human race. We are all image bearers of the Creator God, sharing 99% of our DNA.
I have no argument here. This is a Christian belief I'm fine with. Sure, you can't back up the Imago Dei scientifically, but it's not a scientific claim, so sure, whatever. It also discourages racism, which I'm a fan of. I'm also not endorsing it.
Now, our DNA is found inside our eukaryote cells in the nucleus, and we're talking about nuclear DNA.
Yep, rather by definition, nuclear DNA is in the nucleus.
Our chromosomes, which are found in the nucleus of our cells, as you can see here, humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad, 46 total. If we could take that chromosome out of the nucleus and we could say, well, what is this chromosome made up of? We would find that a chromosome is tightly coiled DNA. So imagine you could uncoil it, kind of like a slinky that's compressed. You're going to stretch out that slinky and kind of lay it flat. We would see that the chromosomes are made of sections of genes that make up that DNA strand.
Saying that a chromosome, which by the way has two M's, not an M and an N, despite how Jen is pronouncing it, is made of genes is kind of like saying that the human body is made of fingernails. That's part of it, but if you just say that's it, you're missing the majority of it. The majority of chromosomes is things that aren't genes, like ALUs, exons, telomeres, centromeres, actual junk, etc. In fact, only about 3% of the human genome is genes, meaning that on average a chromosome will be about 3% genes. Now, that's not to say that that's the only part doing anything. The genome isn't genes and then useless nonsense.
Well, our genes are those traits that make us unique. Our hair color, our eye color, our skin shade. That's all genetic information.
Please, creationists, please, I'm begging you, at least get a high school level understanding of genetics. Genes code for proteins. Traits are the phenotypic expression of genes, and variations in genes are alleles. This isn't that hard to figure out. These are all very basic vocabulary words that even in my Christian high school got drilled into us in biology class. To be fair, my school wasn't a creationist school, and my biology teacher wasn't a Christian, so perhaps my Christian education was unusual. In fact, a decent portion of the teachers were either not Christians or belonged to another group of Christians than the one that ran the school. Turns out that the school was actually not discriminating based on religion, which is nice.
On sections of DNA that are tightly coiled into our chromosomes that are found in the nucleus of our cells. Well, what we see here is a very orderly process. We see what's called the code of life. That's what they call DNA. It's called the code of life.
I've never heard it called that, but I guess it's an okay thing to say as long as you know you're being figurative.
Have you ever seen a code?
Yes.
A computer code?
Do you always look at it and code it?
Well, you have to. The image translators work for the construct program. But there's way too much information to decode the matrix. You get used to it. I don't even see the code. All I see is blonde, brunette, redhead.
A language, sometimes DNA is called the language of life. Have you ever seen anything that didn't have a programmer behind it, an author behind it?
Yes, every natural language. Natural languages weren't designed by some guy. Now, you can design a language if you want to. That's how things like Quenya, Klingon, and Esperanto came about. But languages like English, Amharic, and Quechua were not designed. They somewhat ironically evolved in a way that is very similar to biological evolution, complete with change over time and common ancestry. Further, when it comes to computer code is written by AI now, and again, ironically, can be and is written by genetic algorithms, which means that the code is not designed and is instead simulated in a way that is set up to directly mimic natural selection and mutation.
No. What we see is we see complete orderliness, a complexity in DNA that we still don't completely understand.
Complexity is not an argument for design. In fact, complexity is usually avoided to the maximum extent possible by designers. Keep it simple, stupid is a saying for a reason.
And people want to say it's a result of random chance processes?
Yep, because we can routinely watch complexity arise in the wild in laboratory experiments with model organisms and in simulation in computers without a designer, and from a combination of random mutations and selection and drift. It's almost like this is part of that operational science that Jen pretends to love so much.
We've never seen that.
Yeah, we've never seen TooManyDemons Reinhardti, evolve multicellularity in a lab. Except for that time around 2018 when Boyd et al. Reported in the paper Analysis of Motility in Multicellular Chlamydomonas reinhardti evolved under predation. Or, that time we watched bacteria evolve a whole new enzyme called nylonase to, you guessed it, digest nylon. Or that time some E. coli in the Lenski long-term evolution experiment evolved an entirely new metabolic pathway to digest citrate in the presence of oxygen. Seems like we have seen complexity in organisms increase. I'd also mention the antifreeze glycoprotein in notothenioid fish, but I already talked about that in this series.
It's a very exact code.
Compared to what?
Bases pair and align perfectly in the DNA code of life.
Yep, chemistry does indeed continue to work as expected in the nucleus of a cell.
In fact, the information in just one human cell, the DNA information, you could fill 700 college-level biology textbooks worth of information.
So now information isn't the size of an organism or the anatomical complexity of an organism, it's just how much data it takes to write down all the base pairs in the genome? Okay, so anytime the genome size increases, that's an increase in information. Neat. That means that information verifiably can increase through mutation, because any mutation that increases total genetic material is definitionally an increase in information. And insertion and duplication mutations are quite common. That's cool. Also, the human genome is 6.27 gigabase pairs, which means that since there are only 4 base pair options, each base pair can be completely encoded in just 2 bits. That means that the amount of information in the human genome is 1.57 gigabytes. That means that you can fit more than 38 human genomes in the same space on your hard drive that the 2022 From Software game Elden Ring takes up. For a big number, therefore God argument, this number isn't even that big.
Organized information.
Hey, did you know that the ordering of genes can itself have fitness effects and can change via mutation, and therefore that the organizational structure in the genome can actually evolve via natural selection? Neat, isn't it?
Well, who could be the author and life giver to that very orderly, complex code?
Well, there's no reason to think it demands an author, but I'm going to go with Lord Xenu. Just don't try to remember him yourself, or you might get pneumonia. After this, we just get more of the Bible tells me so. I don't care because, once again, not empirical.
Now, if we take a look at the human chromosomes, those 23 pairs that we talked about, the first 22 are numbered, as you can see here. That is our genetic information, our different characteristics. That last pair of chromosomes, the 23rd pair, is not numbered. You can see here that it has a letter and it has an X, and we can see 2 chromosomes on top of that X.
Why do I feel like this is about to get transphobic?
Now, this also directly confirms what we see in God's Word. Right? This is called the gender chromosome or the sex chromosome.
I've never heard them called gender chromosomes, but okay. Also, it's not really surprising that the Bible talks about the origin of male and female humans, because basically every creation myth accounts for sex differences in humans.
So if there are 2 chromosomes on the X, this is a female profile.
Typically, but then again, the SRY gene on the Y chromosome that is generally determinative of sex has been known to occasionally cross over onto an X chromosome, resulting in XX males. Additionally, extra androgens in utero, such as testosterone, can result in XX individuals that appear morphologically male, or intermediate between male and female conditions.
And if we see an X, one on X and one on Y, then we know that is a male profile.
Well, again, because the Y chromosome can in fact lose the SRY gene, either from crossing into an X or just a mutation that breaks it, and because only one X chromosome is needed for life, and the Y chromosome is not necessary for an embryo to come to term, there can indeed be humans who are XY females. Additionally, things like androgen insensitivity can cause an XY individual, even one with a perfectly functional Y chromosome, with a functional SRY gene, to be born as either morphologically female or with an intersex condition. Now granted, these things are fairly uncommon, but they also can't simply be ignored, because the people who are born like this are real living humans with their own lives, relationships, families, hopes, and dreams. They count, they matter, and pretending they don't exist is only harmful to them.
There are not 400 genders like you may see on the news today.
And that's where they go full-on transphobic. So let's get into the word sex and gender a bit. Originally, sex referred to the differences between male and female, but in English, that word came to be regarded as vulgar after it started being used to refer to the act of intercourse. Similarly, the words gender from the Latin genus was borrowed into English to describe the noun categories that many languages use that affect the morphology of words that modify that noun. In most European, as well as most Afro-Asiatic languages, these groups of words had one category that generally contained most words specifically referring to male humans and animals, and in some cases things associated with them, and another that grouped together female humans, animals, and things associated with them. Things that were in neither category naturally tended to get assigned to one or the other based on whether the word itself sounded like it belonged to one category or the other category. This is what gender meant originally in English. Because, however, the word sex was increasingly seen as crude, the word gender was used as a euphemism for sex. Now, much more recently, the need was recognized to have a verbal shorthand way to refer to biological realities of reproductive groups in humans, and distinguish it from the societal norms that are traditionally placed on members of those groups, but which are not biologically inherent to them. For example, Western societies generally allow for females to wear dresses, but not males. But there is no biological function making such clothing more appropriate for females than males, and males who wear such clothing suffer no necessary injury for doing so, even if in some areas they may be subject to unnecessary injury from assholes who associate with ideologies like that of Answers in Genesis. These societal norms were deemed genders, while the biological aspects were regarded as sex. This is indeed a recent addition to the language. The first time the distinction was drawn was in 1945, but it wasn't until a decade later that there was anyone really advocating for people to draw the distinction. Since then, the distinction has been spreading from academia into common parlance, but most adults today are still people who grew up when in common use, gender was basically a synonym for sex. Now, there is some sense to the idea that there simply are not as many genders as an individual cares to make up. And this idea has even waned in the conversation from the trans rights side, of late. You know, the side that isn't trying to remove basic human rights from people. The reason is that genders are social categories, and as such, importantly, if a society doesn't have a category that is broadly recognized per se, then it's not a social category. Generally speaking, Western society has two genders, man and woman, and people can fall into one or neither category by either recognition of others or by self-identification or both. As a matter of basic decency, I suggest that people make an effort to recognize people as falling into the gender they self-identify with. Now, it could be argued that within the neither zone, which I am taking to include non-binary and gender-fluid individuals, one could come up with a nigh infinite number of gradations. The problem is that none of them are generally recognized as of now, and so can't really be called genders as such, even though these nuances of identity are real and should not simply be ignored. Now, after this, Jen continues to be bigoted and pretend that what trans people think they're doing is changing their chromosomes and refusing to acknowledge the fact that they are making a distinction between sex and gender, which she may not like, but there is a real semantic difference between the words as the trans people and allies whom she hates use them. I will not be giving her a platform to be bigoted. Sex is not a binary, it is bimodal. No one is pretending that they can change their biology except superficially in this regard, and gender, especially when talking about transgender people, is not synonymous with sex, and is also not binary. I know it's too much to ask that Answers in Genesis not be a bunch of homophobes and transphobes, but you'd think they could at least try to not blatantly strawman trans people, who for the most part just want to be allowed to live their lives and exist in public in the way that feels comfortable to them. But also, that's it. That's the last actual claim she makes, then it's just a wrap-up bit. Well, I'm sorry to end this series on this down note, but I guess that's Jen's fault for ending her talking points with such blatant bigotry. If you did like this video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Philrevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Ellerhan Teller, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostick Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, Ita V, Strawberry Vein, and Star Runner. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.
How